Hello, I'm Stefano from Unrolled, and we are here with Johan Eriksson.
Hello.
Johan, forgive me if I had a bad pronunciation of your name.
No, it's
you
fine.
will provide to give that a better pronunciation. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce you, Johan, that is the author of Oceania 2084. John, would you tell our followers where they can support your upcoming project?
It's live on Kickstarter right now for the limited edition hardback book version called Surplus Edition. And it's also available for free on itch.io. And in both of those platforms, you can just search for the name, Oceania 2084, and you'll find it. So itch.io or Kickstarter. Personally, I would prefer Kickstarter because then, I can maybe land my goal. But I'm also extremly happy if people just pick up the free version and play it and like it. This is the end goal, basically. Yeah.
Well, so we hope this little interview will help all of you understand what kind of game we are talking about and that
Yes.
you will like to support this project. So let's start with the man behind the game. Tell us something about you, a focus on yourself and your gaming experience that took you to develop Oceania 2084.
Yes, so I'm 42 this year. So I've been working at a university since I was 23, I think, at the Department of Game Design. So I've been teaching game design for 20 years, give or take 1 or 2 years. I don't remember exactly. I think it was 2004 I got my first paycheck from that job. And I've been teaching like systems design, and I've been teaching board game design. I've been teaching different production methodologies. I've been teaching all of these things, right? I did a quick calculation the other day that I've been the supervisor and helping student projects throughout all these years, right? So I did a calculation on how many student projects I've been involved in over the course of these 20 years. And I think the sum was somewhere around 1,500 or 1,800 projects that I've been involved in, and so it's a lot.
That's impressive. That's really
Yes.
impressive.
Some of them have been gone further and been actually marketable products, but most of them are like experiments in game design, right? Because it's at a school level, so we can do things that doesn't have to be sellable. So I've seen a lot of weird creations through the years, and in parallel to this, I've always been a gamer. I've always played games. This is why I started working with games. But I think it was only when I was like 18 or 19 where I played an actual tabletop role-playing game for the first time. But I had read rule books since I was like 9, because I got a present from a friend, and it was Dragonbane, the Swedish Dungeons and Dragons-ish type fantasy game. The first version of that one was the first one I got in my hands, and I pored over it. I read the rules. I was fascinated that it's like a meta text that describes. I didn't have these words then, but it's like a meta text where it helps me create my own stories, and I understood that on some kind of fundamental level, but I had no one to play with. So I just basically read rules, and then I started collecting games, and that's the entry point. I was before that though, before actually playing tabletop role-playing games, I was part of a LARPer crew. So I was playing LARPs for a few times. We got into it from some kind of crafts perspective. So we started making our clothes and stuff like that. Very fun. Also mostly fantasy LARPs, stuff like that. For the last 5 or 10 years, depending on how you count, I've been developing tabletop game experiences in different things. There are a lot of stuff I never published anywhere that I don't think it has the quality to give to someone else. But over on itch, that's basically the stuff that I've chosen to go public with. And I've done that in parallel to my paid work. So money has never really been an incentive for the making of these things, or like marketability. It's more like, here are experiments I've done. People can have it if they want. It's free. It's Creative Commons license. That's basically the driving force, is that I express myself through game design. That's my craft. That's my art, so to speak. So whenever I've gone through something, or I've had a hard time understanding something in the world, or like feeling like I'm this concept, I can't really wrap my head around it, I make a game about it. Right?
I think you are making some statement that we all can share. Your whole experience is something we all can understand. Everyone wants to develop his own game, and that's not a marketing question. It's just about give others something you felt, you are feeling, and you want to put into a code. Let me say this way: put into a code that you can share with everyone.
Exactly. And in a sense, like, it's also because in my work, since I'm supervising and guiding students through their own processes, of course I get inspired by things. Of course I like have this need to also do something. So it also becomes this feedback loop, where I'm in the classroom, I'm talking to students, they have wonderful ideas, some very impractical, and sometimes there are like design problems that we can't seem to solve. And then basically these design problems is when my brain really starts tinkering, and I can't let go until I've figured it out. And technically speaking, all of my game creations are that type of a, it's when I can't really let an idea go before I finished figuring it out, right? In the case of the Discworld game I made, it was, how do I make humor? How do I make something that's not too defining for the player, that allows them to still have a very free time and role play time, but with still humor in it, right? So, yeah.
That's look wonderful, a sort of full-time brainstorming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, a very like short anecdote. I think 3 out of 5 games I have on my itch are actually initially dreams I've had, because when I have one of these problems that my brain is trying to solve, I don't even rest with it when I'm asleep, because I wake up with ideas for game systems. So I basically, at like 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning, I wake up from sleep and being like, hey, I have to make a note about this, and then making notes. And so it's part of the creative process.
You have to sleep with a notebook beside your bed.
Yes.
So let's start talking about Oceania 2084. You describe it as an asymmetric adversarial storytelling game. Yes. Would you like to explain this kind of definition to our followers?
Yes, it's a mouthful, and it's a tricky one, because it's not really what we're used to seeing. It's adversarial in the sense that there are 2 teams of players. One team only has 1 player. That's the big brother, the oppression. I also call it a GM-less game-ish, because the big brother player doesn't really have a GM role. instead, one can see that the GM in this case, or Big Brother in this case, plays more like a resource management strategy game.
Yeah.
And the storytelling is basically done by everyone around the table according to a system of who gets to speak and describe about what, when, basically. So for every scene, you figure out, okay, so who is the one who can actually describe this? And then, okay, this player because of which class they're playing or whatever. So that in that sense, it's a storytelling game. We basically around the table, the game plays as a storytelling game. The adversarial role is also one part of it is that there is like a constant tug of war between Big Brother and the resistance players about who gets to describe the most, right? So basically who is defining the world is what's at stake in the game. And
this seems to be really relying on your game design experience, not just in tabletop role-playing games, but in board
yes,
games. Am I correct?
yes,
This is a
yes.
kind of mechanic that is going to oppose two kind of players, but they are
Mhm.
on the same storytelling level.
Yes, exactly. And one thing that's good to know is that from the outset of the game, there is no winning for the resistance players. That is true to the George Orwell uh, aesthetic that's going on here. Oh, yeah, we didn't mention that. The game is based or inspired by George Orwell's novel 1984. It's a very dystopian, there is no winning over the totalitarian state within the game. What you're looking at is like the beginning steps of a resistance movement. It's that's what can be some kind of hopeful part of this. So the resistance players are playing citizens within this superstate Oceania, and Big Brother player is playing the state, the suppression, the repression, the thought police, and the consequences to things. But the consequences to things are rule bound. So as the Big Brother player is introducing consequences to actions, that has to be driven by the existence of or the collection of points that he gathers by surveilling the players, the resistance players. So yeah, it is basically this. That's the whole like abstractly described what the game is, basically.
Yes, so it's not the classical GM versus players.
No.
It's just two different factions you are playing that you are trying to gain the edge one over the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's clear, it's a dystopian game, so
Mm.
hope, yes, but hope for the future, not for me.
Yes, exactly, exactly. One thing that's important here is that Big Brother is actively trying to kill all resistance players all the time. But it's difficult for Big Brother to do that to some extent because as the resistance players are doing things, whatever they are doing, Big Brother player has to roll dice to see if he can observe them doing it. If he observes them in the scene and they are doing something that is interpretable as treasonous, he can get a point. All his reactions that he can introduce into the game costs different amounts of points. So as Big Brother, you can't just say, well, NPC X does this in response to your thing. If you want that to happen, you have to spend points to buy that specific reaction in your Big Brother rule set. The flip side of that is that the resistance players have no such limitation. They can do whatever all the time. There is one condition to what you're telling and describing as the resistance player. It's that what you describe as an action cannot take more than 10 minutes in game to do. So let's say you're planning on infiltrating a building, for example. You have to describe all the steps that takes you to actually doing that. But there are no moves, as in fate, for example. It's not like you have a list of things you can do. You can describe anything. There is a list of what's called acts in the game. The acts are basically a list of consequences to certain things. So if what you're describing as your free form storytelling thing fits one of these acts, then there is a set type of consequence that might occur for that specific thing. Yeah.
So we can say that the resistance has to play small because the big brother has a big net, and you have to play small in the void of this net.
Yeah,
you have to pass through his control.
Exactly. And there are certain things that's systematically built in the game that I don't think it's going to be obvious for players the first time they play it. They're going to learn this as they play more and more. There are rules in the game that allows you to kind of subvert Big Brother and allows you to temporarily be unseen, with a risk, of course, but there is there are things you can do to kind of try to negate and be stealthy about it, or ways to plan out your narratives, hoping that Big Brother doesn't introduce a new NPC into the scene whenever you're doing it, because then that would be bad for you, whatever. So yeah.
And this is really mimicking some kind of real resistance strategy and countermeasures from oppressive regimes.
Yes, and this is interesting and important that you mentioned this, because in many ways this game is maybe not autobiographical, but maybe it is. I've been part of the Swedish and European anarchist movement since I was a teenager. And having seen how organizing against oppressions work, being part of these different structures and ways of trying to basically work for the liberation of human beings, and then facing repression, it's all in there. Some of the game design choices I've made are basically just mimicking what has been lived in real life. Of course, probably screwed up or the volume is increased, but definitely a thing.
It's a personal background that you are making a game of.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's important to say that you are talking in this game about things you know, that you lived on your own skin.
Yes, definitely. And who also, parts of it is friends of mine who's been in situations, or it's not, everything is not me personally. That's why I said maybe auto, maybe not, but it's definitely coming from my time in this movement and in resistance to authoritarianism. That's what it is.
I think that's also the reason because of you didn't choose to give a defined setting for your game, but it's sort of customizable. So the players have to choose some elements to make the real oppressive city and the real oppressive regime.
Yep. This is a very conscious choice, because I didn't want to dictate what what they need to fight against is. Uh, I started first with this idea that I should do an adaptation of Orwell and keep true to it. But I think this was year one. After year one, I really radically shifted focus away from that. And I realized that no, I don't want to do that. I want people to project themselves into this game, because that's when these things become real for us. That's when we start considering what is oppression. And when I've talked to people about a certain mechanic, it's called the deviations mechanic. It's actually part of the world setup. The deviations is something every resistance character has. It's the thing that they carry within themselves. That is, on the one hand, some kind of motivation, some need they have, that is shunned by society. It's seen as treason for some reason. So Big Brother, when Big Brother defines certain parts of his setup, has to ask the players, the other players, what their deviations are, so he can create the rules that Big Brother has in place based on the deviations that the resistance character has. And why I'm talking about this is because it's very possible to play the game fairly casually and saying like, so my character loves ice cream, that's their deviation. And that means that in this world, this is treason. You cannot like ice cream. And as you start thinking about this, it becomes very clear that even small things are really repressive.
Well, if you say ice cream is forbidden, that should seem funny, but if you think about it, that's
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah,
I'm forbidden to eat some ice cream because that's the rule.
Yeah. So I wanted this to be the thing. You're actually discovering what oppression is in that sense. It opens up that conversation at least. And I think I don't think this game will ever teach anyone how it feels to live under oppression if you haven't experienced it. I don't think that it's going to be profound learning experiences if you don't want it to be. But I know for a fact that it opens up the conversation. I know that it does open up that possibility to together with your play group actually have these conversations, because you kind of have to have them to play the game.
Well, we often speak about bleeding in games when you feel too much involved in a game and your heart is bleeding because of this. You are looking for some bleeding.
Yes, definitely. It's designed for that.
It's for
to some degree.
So it's protected in the game. It's not just let's take each other. It's there is a structure that guides the players through the bleeding.
Yeah.
To open the
and
conversation.
Exactly. And it for the surplus edition now, I've actually introduced a very short chapter in the book that's not in the free version, which is a debriefing chapter. So if you feel after a game that, okay, we touched on some pretty heavy stuff here, maybe we should talk about this. All right, let's talk about it. And then there is a structure for how to do that in a way that is based on research around debriefing after role-playing games. Colleagues of mine at Uppsala University have spent some time doing a lot of work around bleed. And so I had a pretty long conversation with them, I think it was last month, around how to structure this specifically for Oceania, and what would make sense to, because basically their setting is when you always have someone like running the debriefing. Someone is the chairperson of debriefing in the game session, right? in this game, I didn't want that to be the case. I didn't want one person to be leading this thing. So instead, I put that into like a almost rule-bound format in the rule book. So there are steps you just follow. The book is your guide, basically, for that. So I thought it was a good addition because I know from playing it myself that sometimes I'm left after the game with this feeling of, okay, but now what? And that's a kind of tricky place to be in if you're alone. Um, yeah.
That's great because we are also to think about safety tools in games,
Hmm.
such something to prevent this problem, this kind of problem. So as X-card, lines, veils, all these kind of tools that helps you setting how to act during the game. This
Mm.
is very interesting because it's the briefing guide
Mm.
that lets you bleed, lets you feel something strange, something you don't want to feel, but you have to feel.
Mm.
But
Mm.
it helps you um, get well after. So
Mm.
it remains a game with
Yeah.
its themes, with its very important themes, but the
Mm.
briefing. So no one has the responsibility of debriefing the other ones,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's all in the spirit of this game.
Yeah. I actually want to say something about the safety tools because I include them in my rule book. They're there. Um, and for me personally, I think they're good. I think they're useful. But the more I know the players I'm playing with, the less I use them. And I think this, uh, because we need the trust, right? We need to know that everyone around the table actually wants each other's best. And until we get to a point where we actually trust each other, they're super good tools. But I think this specific game, honestly, if you have your secure group and you know each other to the degree where you can be vulnerable together, this is actually sometimes best played when you don't need that help, when you can just
Yeah.
see each other instead. So yeah, that's like a caveat here. I think it's still important to have them, and you should use them whenever you feel insecure. It's good to do it, right? But yeah, it is a game that it's meant to be kind of heavy. So um,
Well, I know what you think, what you're saying, because well, I played with a person I didn't even know, but I
mm,
play today with the 20 years long friends.
mm,
I know how far I can push them. They know how
mm,
hard they can push me.
mm,
Uh, so in this kind of game, you can really hard push your
yeah,
friends, push
yeah,
your table. But if you don't know them, you can use the safety tools. But
yes.
that's different from preventing them from the hard experience Oceania 2084 wants to.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's also worth thinking about this in the context of the game. So the game is meant and has been seen in playtests through the years that it actually does this. It's meant to create a strong connection to your character, the character you're playing, and their network of friends and family members and the other player characters, etc. But it's also at the same time a game that is meant to kill them off. So I've seen at the table people being genuinely sad that their character died, having to go through the process of some microscopic grief thing, just to like, okay, so now what? Okay, when your character dies, you basically pick up one. Up until then, I call them shared characters because it's not a non-player character. Everyone plays the shared characters. shared characters are family and friends of any resistance character. And when your resistance character dies, you pick up one of these shared characters to play as onwards. So it becomes a full-fledged resistance character. So it's like a sequence of characters that you will embody and play as. And this also means that you have to live with the consequences from the first character's choices when you're playing as the next character.
And that should be a basic rule of storytelling. If you sacrifice something or someone, it has to have some value to you. You cannot sacrifice something meaningless. You have to live with the consequences of what you sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. So that there's like some unavoidable heavy things in the actual game design. It's going to be a thing where you have to make these choices. You have to, as a person, not as the character, you have to, as a person, realize the impact you have on this, right? So yeah, anyways,
that's great.
That's
so
kind of that.
I really like that we're talking about the game experience and not about the game design of this game. Well, you are a game designer. That's important too. That's really important. But we are talking about what your design wants to make people feel and experience through this game.
Yeah.
I have one last question about this. Often people say that they want politics out of their games. So my personal opinion is that, like Italian actor Gian Maria Volonté said, there is no form of storytelling without politics. There are nuances. There is more politics, less politics. You can have a more funny experience, but at its core, every storytelling has an idea. An idea of how you can see the world, and that's politics. That's just politics. What do you think about this?
So I'm also in this conviction that everything around us is politics all the time. I can't see anything not through the lens of politics. It's what I live and breathe. Of course, I have things that I consume, like media or whatever, that I think is like nonsense media. That is basically, it's hard to see any political function or meaning within it unless you look at it from some kind of meta level, like which role does this fill? How much distraction is this? What is it keeping me away from, right? But that's a different conversation.
We are
when
in
it comes to
brother's mind now.
Yes, exactly. So if we're talking about like get politics out of my games, no, almost all games I actually love are games that are deeply political. I mean, let's look at even like Game of Thrones. It's highly political. I might not agree with it, but it's highly political. So I enjoy it, but it's the existence of politics is actually what makes it good. It gives us something to think about. It gives us something to digest and like consider what our own positions are. Like, why did this move me so much? Why did that not move me so much? Is that connected to some kind of power relationship? Is it connected? Like, yeah, this is a wide field, right? It's for me, that whole conversation is like it's a dead end because it doesn't really make sense. It's like a philosophical mistake to talk about removing the human experience out of my games. Of course, I can't, right?
I totally agree. Even in a basic D&D story, let's kill the goblins. You can find a very light kind of political experience, but there is something. Unless you are taking it on a meta level, as you said, but that's just another theme. So Yes. Oceania 2084 is deeply political games, but that doesn't mean what kind of political party it's about, but just the political means human experience, as you said.
Yeah. There is one thing that is explicit. It's anti-authoritarian at its core. And authoritarian, I don't mean that lightly. I mean literally structures that are trying to remove power from people. It's anti-that.
Well, yes, but anti-authoritarian should be the basic ground of every kind of political discussion.
Yes, I agree. What can I say?
That should not be debatable.
Yeah, exactly. And so I actually got a question on the Kickstarter as soon as it launched. I got a quick question around. I described the political strain of the party, the Big Brother and the party, as post-Lib Dem. So post-liberal democracy authoritarianism, basically. And I got the question, are you aware that in the UK there is a party named Lib Dem? And I'm in Sweden. I do know that there is a party named Lib Dem, but for me that's an abbreviation of liberal democracy. It's not a party name for me. So I wrote it more like an abbreviation of a more general political field. But I started thinking, should I change that? Should I reverse that or like do something else with that? I still ended up actually using post Lib Dem as the politics of the party in the game because I still think it's valid. They're a liberal democratic party. The game is about what happens to some extent when liberal democracies turn authoritarian. Because our society doesn't look. Society doesn't look.
Well, because you didn't use a political party name. The political party used a kind of definition of his whole area, political area. So that's
exactly.
That's totally fine. That's just confirming that the piece of the puzzle is in the right place.
Yes, that's what I thought too.
Well, I have to thank you. I really appreciated our little chat. If you just want to remind another time to everyone where they can find your game and how they can support your project, so this kind of opening the team to everyone, opening the conversation.
Perfect. So, two things. The game is already published since December. It's free on itch.io. So go over to itch.io, check it out, check the rule book. All the rules are there. You can search for Oceania 2084 on Itch and you'll find it. Before going into the Kickstarter, because that's running right now. The Kickstarter is a limited edition hardback book edition of the same rule set, but it's going to be illustrated. It's going to be printed in a very nice qualitative printing. I am doing all the layouting and design of the pages. There is a preview you can see on the Kickstarter page in the updates. And same there. Kickstarter, search for Oceania 2084 and you'll find it there. Any pledge is very appreciated. I also want to mention that I have a basically zero budget for marketing, and I'm doing this it's just me in the team, right? So reaching out and touching people is the biggest work I'm doing right now. And that is something anyone can actually help with. Sharing the link, just talking about the game, bringing up the game in whatever forum you're discussing games in, and like, hey, look at this game mechanic. That's kind of interesting. I've never seen that before. Right? Anything like that would help me so much, honestly. Yeah, I think that's the best actionable thing I can say besides pledging to the actual Kickstarter then. Yeah.
Well, and I would like to say that sharing is just the first step of resistance.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Thank you for that.
Well, I really want to thank you. I want to say goodbye to our followers and see you next time.
Thank you. That was a pleasure.
Thanks for staying with us. If you've enjoyed yourself, give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more content.